You were not born to impress anyone. You were not placed in this vast, mysterious universe to fit into the molds designed by people who do not know your soul. And yet, how many of us spend our lives looking sideways, comparing, competing, chasing the illusion of being enough in someone else's eyes? It is a rather strange game we play, isn't it? We try to become something special by abandoning the one thing that is already profoundly unique, ourselves. But here's the cosmic twist. When you stop trying to be seen, you begin to see. When you stop seeking applause, you hear the subtle music of your own becoming. And when you begin to live, not for their attention but from your center, you shock the world without even trying. This isn't arrogance, it is alignment. This isn't selfishness, it is self-return. So let us begin, not with striving, not with pushing, but with remembering. Remembering who you are when no one is looking. That is the starting point. That is where power lives, not in noise, but in stillness. Not in proving, but in being. We live in a society that trains us, almost from birth, to look outward for our sense of worth. A child draws a picture, and instead of enjoying the process, they look up for approval. Did I do well? A teenager performs, posts, achieves each act accompanied by the quiet hope that someone will notice, like, comment, affirm. This subtle hunger for external validation grows quietly inside us, becoming so familiar that we mistake it for motivation. We believe we must impress, must prove, must convince the world that we are valuable, and only then will we finally be enough. But have you ever paused to ask, enough for whom, and by whose standard? You see, the need for external validation is not just a distraction. It's a spiritual detour. It pulls you further and further away from your own essence. In trying to be liked, you slowly abandon who you truly are. You shape, shift, adjust, filter, and polish, not because you are discovering yourself, but because you are afraid that who you are might not be acceptable to others. In that fear, the authentic self is exiled. What's profoundly ironic is that the more we chase validation, the more we feel hollow. You can receive 1,000 compliments and still feel empty if you don't believe in your own worth. External praise is like perfume. It may make you smell pleasant to others, but it does not nourish the body. True nourishment comes from within. Alan Watts often spoke of the absurdity of seeking to become something other than what you already are. He said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. That's the trap of external validation. It convinces you that who you are now is insufficient, and so you begin a frantic quest to build an identity worthy of applause. But no applause, no recognition, can ever substitute for the deep peace that comes when you know yourself and walk in quiet alignment with that knowing. When you no longer seek validation, something magical happens. You begin to act, speak, and move in the world from a place of freedom rather than fear. You no longer live as a performance but as presence, and ironically it is this presence, unpolished, raw, true, that tends to shock and move others most deeply. Not because you were trying to impress them, but because you were finally brave enough not to. The only approval that truly matters is the kind that comes when you are alone with yourself, and you can look in the mirror and say, I am not perfect, but I am honest. I am not finished, but I am real. Let go of the applause, let go of the image. Focus instead on the one thing that will never fade, the truth of your being. When you anchor yourself in that, the need to impress dissolves, and all that remains is quiet, powerful authenticity. There is a quiet revolution that begins the moment you decide to stop living according to other people's noise and start listening to your own rhythm. Inner alignment is not some mystical concept reserved for sages sitting cross-legged in silence. It is a practical, powerful return to yourself. It is the act of tuning out the chaotic static of expectations, judgments, and comparisons, and instead turning inward to ask, what truly resonates with me? You see, much of the stress and confusion we experience comes not from our circumstances, but from the inner friction between what we feel and what we do. We sense one truth within, yet we behave in accordance with another truth imposed from the outside. This dissonance slowly drains us. It fragments our energy and clouds our purpose. But when your thoughts, actions, and desires are in harmony, not with the world's demands, but with your inner compass, life becomes astonishingly clear. Alan Watts often reminded us that nature never rushes, and yet everything is accomplished. The river does not try to be the mountain, nor does the sun compete with the moon. They simply are moving according to their own nature, not in rebellion against others, but in deep fidelity to themselves. And that is the secret. Alignment is not about resisting the world, but about no longer betraying yourself for it. Inner alignment brings an odd kind of stillness, not because life stops being difficult, but because you stop being divided. The voices telling you to hustle harder, be more, prove yourself, they lose their grip when you realize that none of them ever knew who you truly are. They speak only to the masks you've worn, never to the soul underneath. But when you begin to act in accordance with that soul, your choices simplify. You no longer need 100 strategies to be liked or accepted. You just need to be true, and here's the twist. Once you align with yourself, you become potent. There is a magnetic power in a person who is no longer trying to be anything. They walk into a room and shift the atmosphere, not through force, but through presence. People begin to notice, not because you're shouting, but because you're centered. That's the kind of shock that doesn't come from ego. It comes from essence. This doesn't mean you'll never doubt yourself or that life becomes easy, but it does mean that you'll stop living as a stranger to your own life. You'll stop chasing things that were never yours to begin with, and in that freedom you'll discover a quieter joy not dependent on outcomes or applause, but rooted in the simple fact that you are living in accordance with your truth. Inner alignment is not a destination. It's a practice, a daily decision to honor what is real in you, even when the world tells you to be something else. That is where your power begins, not in striving but in returning, not in noise but in knowing. There is a strange paradox in life. Those who shout the loudest, who clamor for attention and chase the spotlight, are often the ones whose presence fades quickly. Their energy burns fast, like a firework, brilliant for a moment, then gone. But the ones who make the deepest, most lasting impact often don't seek it. They aren't concerned with being seen. They are simply rooted, authentic, and quietly powerful. And that is what shocks the world. When you stop performing and start being, something remarkable happens. You shift from effort to essence. You no longer have to strategize how to be impressive. Your very existence, grounded in authenticity, becomes magnetic. This is not about arrogance or ego. It is not about convincing others of your greatness. It is about embodying your truth so deeply that others feel it without a word being spoken. Alan Watts often spoke of the futility of trying to control or manipulate life. He compared it to trying to hold water in a clenched fist. It slips away. But if you open your hand, the water stays. Likewise, when you let go of trying to control how others perceive you and simply dwell in your truth, you become impactful in ways that effort never could achieve. The paradox is that your greatest influence comes not when you strive to impress, but when you are unshakably yourself. This is the essence of effortless impact. It is the power of a calm mind in a noisy room. The strength of someone who doesn't flinch in the face of disapproval, because they are not seeking approval to begin with. And this kind of presence cannot be faked. It is cultivated by turning inward, by doing the inner work that most avoid, by facing your own fears, your doubts, your truths, and emerging not with a polished mask, but with a quiet knowing. When you live this way, people notice, not because you demand attention, but because you carry an energy that cannot be ignored. You shock them, not with noise, but with peace, not with ambition, but with certainty. In a world obsessed with speed, efficiency, and image, someone who is calm, deliberate, and unbothered stands out more than any performance ever could. And this is not about hiding from the world. It's about meeting the world on your terms, from your center. It's about walking into every space with the confidence that you don't need to prove anything to anyone, that your being is enough, that your alignment is your authority. The ones who truly leave a mark on this world are not always the loudest or the most visible. Often they are the ones who are most deeply in tune with themselves. And that kind of authenticity, that kind of grounded presence, ripples out in ways that can't be measured by likes or followers, but felt profoundly in the hearts of others. There's a common misconception that focusing on yourself is selfish. But in truth, the opposite is often more dangerous. When you live to serve others' expectations, to meet their needs before you understand your own, you begin to disappear. You become a mirror reflecting back the desires of everyone but yourself, and in the process you lose the very thing the world actually needs from you, your authentic presence. Focusing on yourself sincerely and consciously is not about isolating from others or indulging in ego. It is about returning to your inner foundation, so that everything you offer the world comes from a place of wholeness rather than depletion. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot give meaningfully if you have no idea who you are or what you truly need. Alan Watts often reminded us that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. And you can't live fully if you're constantly outsourcing your worth to others. When your attention is fixed on approval, recognition, or being seen as good or successful, you operate from a place of lack. You give in order to receive, you love in order to be loved, you perform rather than connect. But when you focus on yourself not in a narcissistic way, but with sincere inquiry, you begin to understand your values, your rhythms, your truth. You start to make decisions that nourish your spirit instead of draining it. You begin to set boundaries not to push people away, but to honor your space and protect your energy. And in doing so, you actually become more available to others, not less. There is a difference between self-centeredness and self-return. Self-centeredness is rooted in fear, in the need to dominate, control, or be seen as superior. But self-return is a form of coming home to your essence. It is the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself for the comfort or expectations of others. And here's where the paradox unfolds. The more you focus on yourself, on healing, on clarity, on inner peace, the more radiant you become. People begin to notice a change. You speak differently, you carry yourself with grace. Your presence becomes a calm in the storm. And it shocks them not because you set out to shock anyone, but because they've grown so used to the version of you that was always accommodating, performing, pleasing. Your peace becomes disruptive. Your joy becomes contagious. Your boundaries, once invisible, now draw a line that demands respect. You can give so much more to the world when you give from overflow instead of emptiness. Focusing on yourself allows you to cultivate that overflow. It allows you to create a life that is not reactive but intentional. And when you live from that place, you no longer need to impress anyone. Your very presence becomes a quiet revolution, not born of ego but of integrity, not powered by noise but by the simple, profound act of being true to yourself. Transformation in its truest form is not about adding more to who you are. It's not about layering on achievements, accolades, or personas. Real transformation is a process of peeling away everything that is not you, everything you've adopted out of fear, insecurity, or the desire to belong. It is not a building up but a stripping down, and in that letting go you begin to remember your essence. the you that existed before the world told you who you should be. From childhood, we are conditioned to form an identity based on roles, expectations, and comparisons. We are praised for being agreeable, punished for being too bold, rewarded for fitting in, and shamed for standing out. Over time, we internalize these responses, and slowly, our true nature becomes buried under layers of false identities. We begin to live through the ego, a mask built to keep us safe, admired, and acceptable. Alan Watts spoke often about the illusion of the ego, that persistent idea we carry of being a separate self, a name, a role, a story. But this ego is not the real you, it's a social construct, a tool for navigating the world, but not the essence of your being. The more tightly we cling to this ego, the more we suffer, because we are constantly defending something that was never real to begin with. To transcend the ego is not to destroy it, but to see through it, to stop mistaking the mask for the face. And when you do, something incredible begins to happen. You no longer need to pretend, you no longer need to be somebody in order to matter. You begin to act from a deeper place, not from a desire to prove your worth, but from a quiet awareness that you already are worthy, simply because you exist. The world is shocked not by perfection, but by truth, not by polished personas, but by those who dare to show up as they are. When you shed the false self and begin to move from your essence, your energy changes. There is no longer a frantic need to perform. Your presence becomes calm, powerful, unshakable, not because you are trying to be strong, but because you've stopped pretending to be weak. This kind of authenticity is rare, and that's why it's so impactful. Most people are too afraid to let go of their image, their reputation, their illusion of control. But the moment you do, you gain something far greater: freedom, peace, clarity. You shock others not through force or status, but through quiet liberation, through the bold, unapologetic act of being yourself. So if you want to transform, don't seek to become more. Seek to become real. Let go of what is not true. Drop the act, burn the script, return to the simplicity of your being. That's where your power is. That's where your light lives. And when you walk in that light, you don't need to chase attention. Your presence alone will awaken it.
You see, most of us are constantly reaching outward, grasping at opinions, validation, and distractions. We live in a world that rewards noise, applauds reaction, and misunderstands stillness. But there is a profound truth hidden in the quiet corners of existence, that the deepest transformation does not come from shouting louder, but from turning inward, focusing on yourself and remaining silent. Because in that silence, something extraordinary happens. The self begins to bloom. You see, most of us are constantly reaching outward, grasping at opinions, validation, and distractions. We live in a world that rewards noise, applauds reaction, and misunderstands stillness. But there is a profound truth hidden in the quiet corners of existence, that the deepest transformation does not come from shouting louder, but from turning inward, focusing on yourself and remaining silent, because in that silence something extraordinary happens. The self begins to bloom. We have been conditioned to believe that speaking up, asserting our importance, and always being in motion equates to strength. But that's a misunderstanding. Strength in its purest form is often quiet. The ocean doesn't need to explain itself, and the stars do not argue their place in the sky. They simply are. In the same way, when you begin to focus on yourself, truly and deeply, you start to see that silence is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of clarity. Now imagine that your mind is like a still pond. Every thought, every opinion, every anxious reaction is like a stone tossed into the water. What happens? Ripples, distortion. You no longer see what lies at the bottom. But when you stop reacting, when you let the world go on while you remain still, the waters settle. You see clearly. This clarity cannot be found in the noise of others. It cannot be found in debates, arguments, or social applause. It must be cultivated within. The more you focus on your own being, your breath, your thoughts, your energy, the more you realize how much time you've spent trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You cannot control the chaos of the world, but you can master the harmony within. Staying silent doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become precise. It means you choose when to speak, and when you do, your words carry weight. Silence teaches you that not every opinion deserves a response, not every conflict requires your presence, and not every emotion should be broadcast to the world. You learn to conserve your energy like a sacred flame, rather than spilling it everywhere, hoping someone else will warm you. And, focusing on yourself, this is not selfishness, this is sacred responsibility. You are the only one who can walk your path. You are the only one who can feel your breath, hear your heartbeat, and navigate the labyrinth of your own mind. When you turn your attention inward, you begin to notice the layers of noise you've absorbed from others. You start shedding them. You realize quite humbly that much of your suffering was inherited, not chosen. When you are silent, you become an observer, not just of the world, but of your own mind. You begin to watch thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across the sky. And in that witnessing, you find a space that is untouched by fear, anger, or doubt. That space is your true self. People may misunderstand you. They may say you've changed, and they'd be right, because you are no longer dancing to the beat of their drum. You've found your own rhythm, and it plays softly beneath the surface of all things. The one who focuses on themselves and walks in silence is not running away from the world. They are returning to the source. So let the world make its noise. Let it shout and react and swirl in endless debate. But you, be the mountain, be still, be silent. And in that sacred space, know this: you are growing in ways no eye can see, no voice can define. You are becoming whole. Stillness and silence are not weakness, but deep reservoirs of wisdom and self-awareness. Yet most people flee from silence as if it were a threat. They fill every moment with noise, constant chatter, music, scrolling, distractions. Because to be still is to be confronted with oneself, and that can be terrifying. But what they don't realize is that silence is not empty. It is full of answers. In silence, you begin to hear the deeper voice that has always been speaking beneath the noise. The one that says, "You are enough." The one that whispers, "Let go." The one that has watched you chase after things, people, and ideas, not out of joy, but out of fear of being alone. And when the noise fades, when you stop running, that voice begins to rise like a hidden melody you didn't know was there. That is the voice of awareness, of truth. You see, in silence, you are not losing connection, you are regaining it. Not connection with the outer world, but with the inner one. It's where you discover the real you, not the one dressed up for public approval, but the quiet witness behind the roles, behind the identity, behind the voice in your head. And once you start to feel that presence, that simple beingness, you realize you don't need to perform for the world anymore. You simply need to be. Silence is a form of spiritual discipline. It teaches patience. It teaches observation. When you speak less, you listen more, not just to others, but to the subtleties of life. You begin to notice how the wind moves through the trees, how your body responds to stress, how certain thoughts trigger emotions. You start to catch yourself before reacting. You find space between stimulus and response. And in that space you find freedom. The mind is like a wild horse, always racing toward the future or galloping back into the past. Silence is the stable. the place where you sit with that wild energy and gently, without force, bring it to rest. Not because you are trying to stop thinking, but because you are no longer fighting your thoughts. You are simply watching. And in that watching you begin to disidentify. You realize, these thoughts are not me. These emotions are not me. I am the one aware of them. This shift is profound. Because once you realize that awareness is your true nature, everything begins to change. You stop seeking validation because awareness does not need to be seen. You stop arguing to prove a point because awareness knows truth cannot be argued. It can only be lived. You stop filling the silence because you've come to trust it. It has become your companion, not your enemy. And in a world that confuses volume with power, your quiet presence will seem like a mystery. People will wonder how you are so calm, so grounded, so untouchable. They won't realize that your strength is not in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply you've listened. To yourself, to life, to the present moment. The paradox is that silence speaks. It speaks of inner peace. It speaks of depth. It speaks of alignment. And when you learn to dwell in it, you stop chasing everything that was never meant for you. You no longer react. You respond. You no longer seek, you allow. And what comes to you in that space is no longer distorted by noise, but chosen in clarity. So if you wish to evolve, stop shouting over life's symphony. Sit in silence, listen. And focus inward. That is where all growth begins. Not in proving yourself to the world, but in discovering the self the world can never touch. When you turn your attention inward and begin to truly focus on yourself, you step onto a path of liberation, not the kind of liberation sold by advertisements or promised by external achievements, but a deeper, quieter freedom, the kind that cannot be taken away because it was never given by the world in the first place. You begin to realize that the more you chase external validation, the more you abandon your own center, and in doing so you become lost in 1,000 mirrors, each one reflecting a version of you that is not quite true. To focus on yourself is not to become selfish. That is a shallow misunderstanding. It is to finally take responsibility for your own energy, your own peace, your own growth. You stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what do I think of myself? You stop wondering if you're doing enough to be seen and start wondering if you're doing enough to be whole. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You see, when your attention is scattered across the opinions, emotions, and expectations of others, you are no longer living your own life. You are living a performance, a play directed by the hopes and fears of people who may not even know themselves. But when you gather your attention like scattered light and bring it back to yourself, it becomes a laser. It becomes focus, and focus, when directed inward, becomes insight. You begin to notice the patterns you've been repeating, the wounds you've been avoiding, the strengths you've been downplaying. You begin to clean the house of your mind, not out of shame, but out of respect. You begin to say no to what drains you, not because it is wrong, but because it no longer fits the architecture of your soul. And you begin to say yes to what nourishes you, even if no one else understands it. Focusing on yourself is not isolation. It is recalibration. It is a sacred return to what is real, what is honest, what is quietly alive inside you. It's about sitting with your own thoughts long enough to know which ones are guests and which ones are your home. And once you find that home, that quiet space within you, everything outside begins to lose its grip. The opinions of others no longer shape your sense of worth. The chaos of the world no longer dictates your inner peace. You begin to move differently, not out of rebellion, but out of alignment. You no longer try to fit in where you don't belong. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not ready to listen. You realize that not everything needs your reaction. Some things simply need your absence. And as you continue focusing on yourself, something powerful begins to happen. You stop needing the world to approve of your path. You become your own compass, your own anchor, your own quiet revolution. The need to prove, to impress, to please, it dissolves. And what remains is a stillness that radiates strength, a silence that speaks volumes, a presence that cannot be shaken. This is not the path most people choose. It's not loud or glamorous, it won't get you applause, but it will give you peace. And in that peace you will find something far more valuable than praise. You will find yourself. Not the version of you shaped by others, but the one that existed before the world told you who to be. To focus on yourself. Not because the world doesn't matter, but because you do. And when you finally meet yourself in that silence, you'll realize you were never lost. You were simply distracted. Now you are home. The world will test you, not always through great tragedies, but through constant noise, through subtle distractions, unnecessary opinions, small provocations, and endless invitations to react. And every time you take the bait, every time you answer back, defend yourself, prove your worth, you give a little piece of your power away. You become entangled in a drama that was never yours to begin with. But when you choose to stay silent, when you choose to remain grounded within yourself, you become untouchable. The noise of the world becomes like wind. It may stir the surface, but it cannot move the mountain. The chaos outside of you is not the problem. It's your reaction to it that determines your peace. People will always have something to say. They will misunderstand you, question you, provoke you, praise you, ignore you, and then return again with opinions freshly formed from their own insecurities. But none of it is really about you. It's about them. It's about their inner world projected outward, searching for someone to mirror back what they themselves cannot accept. If you let every passing comment disturb your inner stillness, you become a puppet pulled by invisible strings. But if you learn to observe without attachment, if you learn to let people be loud while you remain quiet, then you begin to live from a different place entirely, a place where your energy is not scattered by every stimulus, but held like a sacred flame. You don't have to announce your boundaries, you become the boundary. You don't need to explain your peace, you embody it. It's a strange thing, but once you stop reacting, once you truly embrace your silence, people start to feel it. Your presence changes. You no longer need to speak to be heard. You no longer need to prove to be known, because the energy you carry says more than words ever could. Silence, when born from self-awareness, speaks directly to the soul. It disarms ego, it interrupts patterns, it commands respect, not the kind demanded through force, but the kind naturally given to one who has mastered themselves. Staying silent does not mean turning away from life. It means stepping back far enough to see things clearly. It means knowing when to speak and when silence will serve you better. It means choosing peace over being right, growth over being praised, solitude over shallow connection. In silence, you begin to discern what actually matters, what actually deserves your energy. Most of it doesn't. This is not always easy. The ego wants to speak. It wants to be seen, to win, to dominate. But what if you didn't need to win? What if you no longer needed to convince anyone of anything? What if you realized that the truth doesn't shout? It just is. In that moment, you'd begin to taste real freedom. A freedom that doesn't depend on outcomes or approval. A freedom that arises when you decide to be rooted in yourself rather than swayed by the world. And in this freedom, you start to notice how much beauty there is in simply observing. You hear the birds again, you feel your breath, you notice the quiet wisdom in a sunrise. These moments aren't loud, but they are everything. They are life speaking in a language beyond words, a language only understood when the mind is quiet. So let the world be noisy. Let it rush and demand and chase. You have nothing to prove. Your silence is not a weakness. It is a sanctuary. It is where you meet the truth. And from that still, silent center, you will move with a clarity that cuts through confusion, with a presence that requires no explanation. Let the world make its noise. You be the calm, be the still point in the turning world. Be the one who listens deeply, acts wisely, and rests peacefully. Because you know who you are. There is a profound shift that happens when you become the observer. Not just of the world around you, but of your own mind, your own reactions, your own patterns. You begin to realize that most of what you've been caught up in, most of the stress, the conflict, the emotional turmoil, was not life happening to you, but your mind interpreting life through a narrow reactive lens. And the moment you step back, even slightly, and begin to watch instead of react, everything begins to change. To become the observer is to reclaim your awareness. It's to recognize that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, and you are certainly not the labels that have been placed on you by others. You are the one witnessing all of it. You are the space in which these experiences unfold. And once you see that, once you taste that spaciousness, you can never fully go back to being blindly identified with the noise inside or outside of you. When you stop identifying with every passing emotion, you give yourself room to breathe. Anger comes and you watch it. Fear arises and you see it without panic. Even joy, which we often chase, is seen clearly, not clung to, not feared for its end. This watching, this silent witnessing, is not cold or detached. It is warm, it is compassionate, and it is free. It allows you to experience life fully without being imprisoned by it. The observer is not passive. It does not mean you do nothing or that you withdraw from life. It means you engage with life from a grounded, conscious place. You respond instead of react. You listen, not just to reply, but to understand. You move through the world with a quiet strength that doesn't need to be recognized to be real. And people will feel it, even if they can't name it. They'll sense the depth in your silence, the steadiness in your presence, and it will draw a different kind of energy toward you, more authentic, more aligned. It takes courage to be the observer, because it means letting go of the familiar drama. It means no longer blaming others for your inner state. It means facing the truth of your own conditioning, your own unconscious patterns, and choosing to rise above them. It is not always comfortable. Growth rarely is. But in that discomfort lies transformation. In that quiet space of observation, you begin to rewrite the script. And with time, as your observer self strengthens, the world no longer has the same power over you. You see people not as threats or competitors, but as fellow travelers, each carrying their own wounds, their own illusions, their own moments of clarity. You stop taking things personally because you see clearly most people are not reacting to you, they are reacting to their own story about you. And just like you, they are still learning to wake up. In this space of awareness, peace arises, not because life gets easier, but because you stop resisting it. You stop demanding that everything fit your expectations, and instead you meet reality as it is. That's where the power lies, in seeing clearly, in witnessing deeply, in knowing that your center cannot be touched by passing storms. So become the observer. Watch your mind, watch the world, watch without judgment, without grasping, without fear. In that watching, you'll find the stillness beneath the motion, the truth beneath the noise. You'll begin to live not from reaction, but from wisdom. And in that wisdom there is a quiet joy, a steady peace that no circumstance can take away. This is the art of being free while still fully alive. This is the path of silent strength.